we go back to what is familiar, right? We see this in trauma as well. Like people go back to the traumatic relationship or they go back to the traumatic situation, not because it's safe, but because it's familiar. I work with families. I try to keep it as predictable. So if it's predictable, like this is going to be the structure, this is how long it's going to be, that immediately creates the safety.
I'm Diana Oehrli, and I've spent most of my life learning firsthand what privilege actually costs. The legacy control, the family expectations, the guilt of feeling trapped in a life everyone thinks you should be grateful for. If you've ever wondered why having everything still feels like something's missing, you're in the right place. Welcome to Pressures of Privilege. My guest today is Dr. Constant Mouton, an addiction psychiatrist from the Netherlands, who is changing how families understand and support recovery. His work is rooted in neuroscience, and his message is simple. You can't think your way out of a nervous system in survival mode. For years, families have been told to either confront or detach. Both leave them lost and dysregulated. Constant saw that over and over, people improving in treatment, then falling apart the moment they returned to the same dynamics at home. That's when he realized families aren't on the sidelines of recovery. They're biologically central to it. If you've ever loved someone in addiction, or if you've wondered why smart, motivated people can't seem to change no matter how hard they try, this conversation is for you. Welcome, Constant.
Thank you
good
very
to see you
much.
again.
Yes, nice being here. Thanks for inviting me.
Oh, you're welcome. Well, I read your book, The Road Back to Family Recovery. It was so great. And I loved the person of concern and how that person is within a system in families.
Yeah.
Instead of being the person who is causing all the trouble.
Person is not the problem. That's a core concept in the book. Yeah. Yeah. So what I always think is when I work with families, one of the first things I explain is that if you think of a family system, if they come to see me, well, for intervention or even for the first time, whatever the scenario is, they talk about the person with addiction. And they call this person the addict, which is a word I don't like to use. I like to talk about people with addiction. You have something, you are not your addiction. And then they talk about what this person has done, and they talk about the lies, and they might talk about manipulation and all the bad things they talk about. And that this must stop. And then I explain to them, but the person is not the problem. The problem is addiction, and addiction does all of these things. Addiction changes the way we think, the way we feel, the way we act a lot. I'm always not surprised really anymore, but I used to be surprised at the fact how people look back on their addiction and think, oh my God, I did all these things. It's really not who I am. You really see the personality change, right? And then we draw it out in little puppets or little people in a ring, and we put the person in the middle. And then you see like one person is hyper focused. That's usually the mom or the partner, and that person is completely consumed by the addiction and the person with addiction. And what we try to do is to put the person back in the circle of the family, and then everybody can look at the addiction, and you don't have to only focus on the person, because the person is part of the problem, but so is the family. Like everybody in that circle has work to do to have this system heal.
When I first was introduced to the idea of addiction, even I remember thinking, what? I have to do work on myself? This is before I even confronted my own alcoholism. I was in that sort of, being told by my therapist to go to Al-Anon. And for me, I was like, why do I have to do the work? I mean, isn't he the problem?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And people get angry in therapy as well. If I give homework, because I'm a therapist, I love homework and a little bit of assignment. And people get angry with me. It's like, I came here to be fixed, It's like, well, firstly, nothing, you don't need to be fixed. There's a problem that needs to be fixed. And the problem needs to be worked on, but the work needs to be done by you. I'm like on the sideline. I'm like your coach and your cheerleader and your guide. But you have to do the work. And that step to take the responsibility is so hard for people.
So you now are, you started working with individuals, but now you're working more with families. What created that shift?
Yeah, so I've been a psychiatrist now for 20 years, 21 years, I think. So, I mean, for me, kind of, I've always been curious about how humans work. So, I started biologically, first doing medicine, and then I got into psychiatry. And psychiatry is very biological. Like most psychiatrists work more biologically. And then as you go along, like I did my training in South Africa, you also do therapy work, and you work more. So the system kind of grows, and you work on your own psychology, your own things, as well as you do psychotherapy. So you become a psychotherapist eventually. So I worked more psychotherapeutically. And then over time, what I saw with families and with communities is that if people do the work, if the individual does the work and they go back to the same system, and the environment didn't change, the friends didn't change, and the families didn't change, then people relapse very, very quickly. Well, I did a few trainings, and I read a million of books on family dynamics, and every time it comes back that the family should be part of the solution, but then they need to be involved. And one thing that fascinates me is how we try to keep families away from the person doing the work instead of involving them. It's really the weirdest thing. Like we expect people to do the work individually, but the families can worry and they can call us, but they should please stay away and like don't involve yourself in the treatment. And I think a lot of professionals are also just scared of working with families. I think it's a big thing that I see now. So that's kind of how I got into involving families in the treatment as well and making them really part of the whole process.
How are the outcomes?
There's a few interesting things that happen. So the first thing is if you get the family involved before the person enters treatment. So think of like intervention scenario where the family calls and they're worried because that happens often. Like the families are worried before the individual. That might help to get a person uh, into treatment. If the family stays involved, so a lot of the older kind of intervention models were like you kind of the surprise models where you surprise the person, the Johnson model, and you get the person into the clinic and then everybody thinks the problem solved. I work more with the RISE model. And so what I like to do is to involve the family throughout the process. And then you see the people stay in treatment longer. So they enter treatment, they stay in treatment longer. The chances of completing treatment is higher. And if you involve the sort of that first year of recovery is always a complex year, like your brain is doing so much of recovery work there. So if you keep the family involved for that first year, then the outcomes in general also just improve. So people really tend to reach long-term sobriety and recovery much quicker if you involve them in the whole process.
And what kind of work does the family do and concurrently with?
Oh yeah, so they do a lot of work. So in these family meetings, we would typically check in on everybody, so how everybody's doing. So it's not only how the person of concern, the person with the addiction is doing, but everybody's doing. How people are dealing with the addiction itself. So if you've had struggles with the addiction, if you've seen some manipulation, if you've been asked for money, if you've encountered some lies about it, you all bring it to the family meeting. And these family meetings are very safe. Like safety for me is, I think you mentioned it in the intro as well, safety and regulation is super important in these meetings as well because people come in angry. So we work on regulation, on co-regulation, and we work on commitments. Everybody has to commit to what they're going to do about the situation for the next week or 2 weeks, depending on how frequently we see each other. So we like to also keep things equal. So if the person of concern of the person with the addiction needs to go to a fellowship meeting, then we also want the family to do that. So if the person with addiction wants to go to the A, then other people can go to CODA or Al-Anon or one of those meetings. So if we all going to work on, I don't know, one of the steps, so what trust means or what hope means for you, then everybody has to do that homework and come back and report back how that. So we really try to have the families also do the work. There's so much overlap really between what families go through and what the individual goes through. Like there's so many similarities there.
What is the overlap?
Like the typical symptoms that we see, or the things that we associate with addiction. Like one that I always think of is the denial in the beginning, like I don't have a problem. Like you said, why do I have to do the work? The individual might have that, but the family also has that. The families are very fronted with why do we have to do the work, or the problem is not with us, or we don't, We're also trying to manipulate the situation, to get it into direction. The person with addiction might try to go in the direction of addiction, and the family's in direction of recovery, but both are manipulating the situation instead of being open about it and saying what you need and saying what you expect and, communicating well about it. The sense of loss, like I think every person with addiction I've ever spoken to have had some other sense of loss, sense of emotion dysregulation. There's a certain amount of, I don't know, call it depression immediately, but you know, sad feelings that need to be numbed. And the family also has this. I think the guilt and the shame. Families don't want colleagues and members from the community to find out about it. So they also keep secrets, just like the person with addiction. So there's so much overlap, really.
It's interesting, the secrets and the denial. But what else do families get wrong? You've said in the past that families are usually told to either confront or detach, and both leave them lost and dysregulated. Can you talk more about that?
There's so many new things in addiction care these days. And some of the older ideas were that it's a moral failure, or there's a choice to stay addicted. All those kind of things. And then the advice that they got was to detach. Usually, just detach, like no contact, no money, nothing, like the tough love kind of situations. But what happens then is the person with addiction, in active addiction, then is completely dysregulated, right? I mean, because you go through cravings, you go through withdrawals if you don't get the drugs. You have all these different emotions and behaviors that you show that you don't recognize. Usually your sleep is disturbed. So the nervous system is completely dysregulated. But the families also get dysregulated because they still worry. They're still anxious about the person. I mean, they still, I think 99% of time still love the person with the addiction. They might not love the addiction, but the person with addiction, they surely still love. And I just think if we can work on the connection rather than the separation of this in this group, it's just so much more powerful. It asks for a lot of vulnerability for people to do that. It's not an easy choice, I think.
So imagine you have a 25-year-old child living at home and they're the person of concern. Should the parents allow this kid to stay at home, or what should they do?
Well, I always think it starts with a conversation. Like be open about. And this always sounds so simple when you tell people, and they're like, oh, of course, but it's really hard work. I mean, like if you're in this situation, to have that first conversation, I think there's a whole chapter in my book about having that first conversation. It's just good to kind of open the door and express your concerns. Like just start with what you're concerned about and tell the person what you need. We tend to, or families tend in general, to be accusatory in the way they have these conversations.
Like, you always do this and you do this and you hurt
Yeah,
me here.
and you need to change, and you need to go to treatment, and you need to stop using. And I always think that's the silliest thing to tell somebody with addiction. Like you have to stop using. It's like, duh, of course. They also know that. But if it was easy, then there would be treatment centers. And you know. So I always think like let them stay at home, but have the conversation. What I also like about these family meetings is if we organize them, we invite everybody. So everybody gets the same invitation. Also the person in addiction, like we're going to have a family meeting and we're all concerned about you and you're invited. And then you might think that the person will not pitch up, but they always come because the meeting is about them. So of course you're going to go and defend yourself in that meeting. And then in these meetings, we really, really focus on safety and trying to regulate everybody's emotions so that you can have a constructive conversation about the addiction. I just think there's no quick fix in this. There's no these conversations take some time as well.
I was curious about, you said you keep it safe. How do you do that?
Oh, so I'm the strict one in the meetings on rules. So we have very strict rules. Like there's no shaming, there's no blaming, there's no name calling. You use the I statements, which I think most people know. Like I feel this and this and this, or I see that in that pattern. and you express your needs. So you say like what you need. You never tell people what they have to do. You say what you need, and it's up to the other person to give it or not. So that's how we try to keep the structure. And I think one of the because we start to talk about regulation already, like one of the co-regulation things is repetition. Like if things are familiar and it's repetitive, that also feels safe. So getting into these meetings are a bit tough at the beginning because people have so much to say and they have so much emotions and things. But after I think the third or fourth meeting, usually people know how it works and it's always the same structure, and that really gives a sense of safety as well to introduce the regulation as well.
What do you do when somebody starts to ruminate? And ruminate meaning like they're talking about the past and, maybe they're depressed and they're just going on and on and on about the past and how sad they are. Do you let them go on or do you give them a time out?
I like people to have their authentic feelings and express that, so that could be okay. If it tends to become, and people are allowed to say what they are going through. So if as long as it's still in relation to the addiction, that's okay for me. But like in any group setting, really, because I also see it as almost like a group therapy. In any group setting, you will also have to like structure it a little bit. So sometimes I will cut people short and say anything like, so in summary, that's what I hear. Is this correct? To kind of politely cut the story short a little bit, just so that everybody also gets a turn to say what they need to say.
The regulation you're talking about is that constancy that they feel that it's familiar.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, humans are strange. Like we, that's how why it's hard to break patterns as well. We go back to what is familiar, right? We see this in trauma as well. Like people go back to the traumatic relationship or they go back to the traumatic situation, not because it's safe, but because it's familiar. And we kind of, that familiarity and safety is kind of intertwined. So in the meetings and when I work with families, I try to keep it as predictable. So I think it's predictability really that's giving the safety in it. So if it's predictable, like this is going to be the structure, this is how long it's going to be, you know, that immediately creates the safety.
What if you have a family member who's maybe critical?
It's all right. Yeah. I mean, that's also an opinion and a feeling that goes with that.
As long as it's not shaming and blaming. What's the difference between criticism and shaming and blaming?
Yeah, so I mean, you can be critical on the process. You can be critical about treatment centers, on me. That's okay. Like that's okay. So you can be skeptical, I guess, about it. But I do a lot of psychoeducation as well. And often when people are just critical, they just don't know. They have a different opinion or something that's maybe not based on neuroscience. Or so I always try to bring it back to that. And then I think with shaming is more telling the person that the person is a bad person. Like I always, with shame in when I work with individuals, if they feel ashamed for what they did in active addiction, that's okay. That's a feeling we can work through with the steps and with therapy. But people don't need to feel ashamed of who they are. So I think that's the dangerous part. If you start blaming somebody or shaming them for who they are as a person, that's a problem. Because nobody chooses to be addicted. Like nobody thinks when they're small, like, what I want to be when I'm grown up. Addicted. That sounds great. Never heard anybody say that.
No, they just think oh, it's not going to happen to me.
Exactly.
Right?
Everybody thinks that.
So what else do you do for the co-regulation aspect in order to get into what you call that window?
The window of tolerance. Yes, the window of tolerance was developed by Dan Siegel. He talks a lot about connection as well. But the window of tolerance is where your nervous system is well regulated. So it's like a middle ground where your nervous system is regulated and you feel calm and you feel confident and you can connect to people and you can listen and process. That's your window of tolerance. We can be hyper aroused, so be above the level, so kind of go to the peaks. And that's when we feel anxious and angry and aggressive, and or you can feel irritable or annoyed, or so that's if you overstimulated, hyper aroused, he calls it, or you can even be hyper aroused, where you kind of like not connected, checked out, not interested, might feel tired, and then you're also not in your window of tolerance. I think the original work was done on individuals of how to get yourself. So there's two things you can do. The one thing with regulation is have daily practices to regulate, and that's good to broaden your window of tolerance to make sure that most of your day you're in your window of tolerance. And there's also like emergency tools that you can use to get back into the window of tolerance when you are detaching or you are anxious. Or so those are two different aspects of the window of tolerance. But you can also use it in families and in groups, because humans always kind of copy the energy of others around them.
So if they see their parent being calm, then it helps them to be calm.
Yeah. So yeah, there was an old concept, I don't know if they still use it, called mirror neurons. So you have mirroring of what the other person does and feel. Some people are more sensitive to that than others, but maybe you've noticed it as well. If you was a very energetic person and they talk and they have also, you also feel kind of like more excited. And if you were a very calm, settled person, then you also get calmed down. So that's the co-regulation. And I mean, this thing happens on the fly the whole day, actually, when we're with people. And I mean, as therapists, use that in therapy sessions as well to co-regulate with the client. If the client is dysregulated, then we should be very regulated and calm and in the moment and connected. And we use that on purpose. But you can teach families as well to do that.
So yeah, so I can imagine in some families, if there's addiction, there's probably hyperactivity, like anxiety and stress.
Absolutely.
And how does that stress and anxiety impact the person of concern?
Like I say, like all emotions are welcome, but not all behaviors are welcome in these meetings. So it's okay to express that you have anger. And this, by the way, the first co-regulation thing that I teach people is to name the emotion. If we feel emotion, we feel overwhelmed. One of the big things we learn in therapy is to give it a name. So you could say like, I'm feeling overwhelmed, or I'm feeling anxious, or I'm starting to get angry. So what your brain does, as soon as you give it a name, then you go from the emotional part of your brain to your cortical side, to the outside of your brain where you can think and process and work on things. So by naming something, that you activate that part of your brain. And that's already calming, then you're also already not as much in the emotion. We teach people grounding techniques, just things like literally putting your feet on the ground, things like box breathing. You can think of taking a pause before you speak. Sounds very obvious, but people don't know how to do that.
Well, how do you do that?
Well, you have to be conscious about it. You have to be conscious about what you do and about your actions and where you're at. So, and also if people feel too overwhelmed to talk, we take a break. They said the typical 90 seconds. I like to just do a 5-minute break, and everybody gets some fresh air, ground yourself, do some breathing, and then we come back and then we talk further. So if it gets too much and people are too anxious or too aggressive, then we take a short break. Sometimes I will go sit with somebody and just help them ground and calm, find their place of their window of tolerance, I guess. And then you can continue the conversation.
Do you have to protect family members from each other? Like if they start fighting, how do you handle that?
Yeah, so physical aggression is of course not allowed. So we just stop the meeting, and if it's really violent, I will call the police.
You do them only online, in person?
I do online as well. So I mean, online, it's quite interesting. Online, people tend to be more calm than in the room. But online, you can also do things like, mute the whole group, close the meeting. And it's also got a lot to do with my own way that I'm in the meeting. Like I need to be calm and I need to be centered when I do these meetings. Like I will never go into a meeting like this when I'm not in my own window of time.
Let's say you had a parent who was maybe shaming and blaming. How would you handle that in a meeting?
So it wasn't to reframe it, I guess. To say like, okay, you're shaming the person. And also I would give it a name. Like, this is what you're doing. Because the behavior of shaming somebody else has a name. So it's like, okay, so I see that you're shaming the person. Because that really brings you back already like, oh, that's not what I meant. Or sometimes they do mean it. And then I would say like, okay, if we go back to the rules, like, what is it that you see? And what is it that you need from the person? So what would make this better? Or what? And it really takes a while for people to get into that language of doing these meetings. It really takes a minute.
I'm thinking of an example. Let's say the person of concern is always 20, 30 minutes late to the meeting, always.
I'm always quite strict on time as well. The meeting starts when the meeting starts, and the meeting ends when it ends. So it's from this time to that time, and that's it. So if you're late for your own meeting, then it means that we're going to talk 20 minutes about you or about the problem or about the addiction, and you would miss the first 20 minutes, and you can read back in the notes because somebody takes notes and send it in that round. But that's it, yeah. So I mean, part of it is also like, people need to, or people start to feel the responsibility for their own actions. And that's such an integral part of recovery, I think, from addiction. Like what you said, like I have to do the work in my own therapy. That's really taking responsibility for your own actions and your own work that you're doing. And families also do that. Families also need to start. They do stop, take responsibility for their actions and their words in these meetings. But people need to learn that.
So that's interesting. So you continue that you don't say, well, if you're not here in 10 minutes, we don't do the meeting.
Oh, no, the meeting goes on. Yeah. And that goes for everybody in the family system. If dad can't make it, then dad misses out on the meeting, but we're still going to ask, hey, has anybody heard from him? And is he doing okay? And any points for him?
Who takes the notes? Do you take notes or is it somebody else in the family?
Somebody in the family. Yeah.
Somebody in the family takes notes and then they kind of send it, copy everybody in the family.
Yeah. Yeah. So the idea of these meetings is also like, I typically work like 6 months to a year with a family. And then in the end, I hope that they never need me again. But in the end, I can really sit back and just see it all happen, and they kind of take care of the whole meeting themselves. So that's where you want to be, because then they have that skill in the family to solve any problem really in future as well.
Oh, that's wonderful. I'm
Yeah.
thinking of all the families who don't have addiction who probably could use something like this.
This works for so many things. I mean, like, usually it's kind of like addiction is the thing that introduces all these skills. I think with recovery as well, one of the things I always tell people is addiction runs in families, but so does recovery. And this is what we mean with it. If we do the recovery skills within the whole family, everybody benefits from this. And you can solve somebody's depression later in life, or maybe somebody has, I don't know, struggles in school or cancer or anything really.
But I think what's important is that you're a trained doctor and a psychotherapist, right? Which is kind of rare in the United States. Here we have psychiatrists and they just do the pill prescribing and they don't do much of the talk therapy. And then you have the, the psychologist who then does the talk therapy. And ideally, you want them to have both. But you're able to do both. So you understand those dynamics in the family and the
Yeah,
psychology behind it, right?
absolutely. Yeah, yes. And with my work with individual clients, I do a lot of trauma therapy. So I'm also trained as a trauma therapist. So I work a lot of trauma. And I do a lot of parts work with schema therapy as well. So I use different things, which I guess you can use with families or individuals. But I think it is important, to have knowledge of the biology of things, but also the psychology and the systems theories. I think it's important to combine them.
Plus, you understand all the personality disorders. So when somebody's trying to hijack the meeting or there's some narcissism, I mean, how do you handle that?
So these meetings are not therapy meetings in the sense of solving those kind of problems. These meetings are more about identifying things that you should work on in your own therapy. So sometimes if we do to see a pattern, I mean, like with narcissism or any personality disorder case, you can point out things, that I notice in these meetings you tend to do, and I try to keep it on behaviors. So maybe that's something you would like to work on. So once again, I would suggest it. I would never tell people what they need to do, but should suggest what they could do. And it usually works quite well. As long as you bring it in a non-threatening, non-accusatory, non-shaming, blaming way, people tend to react pretty good to it.
Wow, these meetings sound fantastic.
I mean, they really help, and they really add something, and you can do different variations on it, I guess. Some people do it only during treatment. Some people tend to be in it for the long run and stay for a year or want to do a year and a half of these meetings. But they really help the families to develop this sense of recovery in the family as well.
In terms of dysregulation, a typical dysregulated person would be somebody who flies into a rage instantly, or they go into maybe the freeze, flight, and fight and fawn, maybe?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
How can that person get out of that?
Once again, the first step, I think, is by naming it, by recognizing what's going on. Yeah. And that's very difficult to do. One thing that I try to teach people is like, if you look at your brain, first, I don't know, when you listen to this, but I'm showing you now. But then the middle part of your brain is the survival part of your brain, right? So that's what keeps your heart beating and breathing and all of your autonomic things that just happens automatically. Then this part around is the emotional part, and then the outer part is your cognitive part that you can think. So if you are in the emotional part and the emotions are just unregulated, you struggle to get to the cognitive part where you can think of things. You can think rationally for solution and problem solving. If you are triggered and you go into this fight, flight, freeze, or fawn mode, you stay in the bottom two parts. Your autonomic nervous system is also dysregulated. So you will feel your heart racing or your breathing being shallow in your chest. It feels like somebody's clenching your throat, and your blood pressure will rise. All these things happen. So literally all your blood in your brain goes here into these parts, and it doesn't get to the parts that can problem solve. So by naming what's happening, so like in internal family systems, they talk about parts work. So by naming the part that is happening, or just name it like, I feel I'm being triggered right now. That already makes you go more to the cognitive side and more to the outer side of your brain, which helps you to problem solve and get back. So if you can do that, that's great. If people shut down completely, that's of course, if people dissociate, that's a different scenario completely. I mean, then you won't be able to name anything. So then I teach people that if that happens to them, to just literally put their feet on the ground, close their eyes, concentrate on the breathing. The breath is super important. To have a little bit longer out breaths than in breaths. So you might go 4 breaths in and then 6 breaths out. It kind of calms the nervous system. And then when you're ready, and that part, your breathing is more regulated, to slowly open your eyes and just look around, just observe the room around you, and just name 5 things that you see. And it can be simple like lamp, plant, carpet, shoes. Just start naming things, because that also brings you back into out of the emotional and autonomic dysregulation part of it. So and you can do other things, like you can do tapping, people tapping their shoulders or just tapping on the side of their legs. It's soft tapping that they can do themselves. Yeah, there's many breathing things that you can do. Also focus on your senses, smelling things. I think what you smell in the room. Some patients like to carry around something that smells nice, like aromatherapy, something that they can open and just smell it when they start to dissociate. So those are kind of things to bring people back. And in the beginning, you have to do it as a therapist, right? So in the beginning, people won't do it on their own.
How do you get somebody who's out of control to actually do any of that? Because maybe anger is even an addiction, maybe for some of them.
Absolutely, yeah. These are patterns. I mean, these are patterns that. So becoming angry would be in schema therapy, we call it the angry child mode. The raging child mode, and people learn to behave like that, and they learn that that's protecting them for something. And that takes very long in therapy, to unlearn and to think like, okay, so my raging child mode is activated, but how do I get back into healthy adult mode? Yeah, because we want to be in schema therapy terms, you want to be back in your healthy adult mode, where you're in that window of tolerance, where you're regulated and you're calm, you can have autonomy and agency over your life, and your day. That's where you want to go back to. So a lot of the trauma work that we do is to teach people to recognize this, name it, explore where it comes from.
But sometimes I hear that people aren't stable enough to do that trauma work. Do you agree with that sometimes?
Well, it depends. I mean, to do that trauma work, if I start trauma treatment, I usually start with the basics, like what we spoke about, the grounding techniques. I work a lot with connection. So we have to build that safe therapeutic connection. Like I will never go into the deep, ugly stuff, right from the get-go. Never. I would never go there because people need to start trusting me as well with the therapy, with their traumas. So work on the therapeutic connection, teach people the basics of stabilizing themselves so they have a little bit of sense of agency over it. Like I do EMDR with a lot of clients. And EMDR is very daunting in the beginning. It's a scary place because you have to really re-experience the emotions and the bodily sensations and everything of the trauma. So before you get there, you have to do all the basics first. Teach the breathing techniques. Make them feel safe. Know how to regulate a little bit before you jump into those things. Absolutely.
So it's a long process. They have to learn to trust you. They need to trust the process. Before you can even do something like EMDR. For our listeners, it's eye movement desensitization.
And reprogramming.
What is that? I mean, I've never actually done that.
I mean, you have different things. The typical one is the light that goes from left to right. So like I have a lamp here. You can also do it with moving your hand, but I'm too lazy to do that. So I like to work with a lamp, and I can't multitask, so I don't do that. But I have a lamp, but you could also have like I have little pulsators that goes from left to right. Somebody's hand. You could do tapping. Anything that goes from left to right.
And it mimics the walking. I think when you're walking, your eye does that anyway.
Yeah, so great link to co-regulation as well. Or regulation is walking. If you feel dysregulated, going for a walk is very, very calm. It really brings the emotions and the things down because of that left, right action of it. Absolutely.
And how does that tap into memories?
Yeah, so how we think EMDR works is, so what you do with EMDR is you let the person go back to the day, well, that you like a visualization of what happened in trauma, and then you ask them to picture it and describe what they see on the picture. So you kind of search with the person for a picture in their brain that they have of the day. It doesn't have to be exactly what happened. It's just what is in their mind at the moment. And then you ask them to feel the emotions when they look at it. And you talk about the thoughts they have, the negative thoughts about themselves usually, or about the situation. This is not safe, or this is not fair. And then feel the bodily sensations. And in the beginning, and this is why it feels, it's you need the safety. Is you try to make everything as bad as you can for the before you can start the desensitization. So you really try to get all the emotions, all the bodily panic symptoms into the body, and then you start with the desensitization. So we say you get the train on the mountain, and then as soon as it's at the top, then you can start the desensitization. And in the desensitizations, we work in sets of 30 to 40 seconds typically. After each set, you just check in, so what's happening, and then it's very interesting. Like sometimes thoughts would shift to something different. Sometimes bodily sensations would shift. Like when I did the training, we practiced on each other. So for me, I felt more stress in my neck area and on my chest in the beginning, and then it moved to my stomach, and then it moved to my lower back, and then it kind of left my body. So each set that I did, something shifted to a different place, which is kind of magical how it works. So when all the tension is out of the body, then we round up with a safe exercise. Like I like deep relaxation exercises or progressive relaxation, body scan, those kind of things to just create the safety. And then we discuss afterwards what happened in the session. So it takes about an hour, but what's amazing about it is we used to use it for once-off traumas. So typical like war traumas or sexual abuse, those kind of traumas. But what we see is you can also use them for personality disorders and kind of things that comes from patterns in your life, things that kind of originated in childhood. You can also go back to those situations with the EMDR. And then the patterns tend to change, and the triggers and this feeling of being triggered, like getting into the angry child mode, or those things also decrease with the EMDR, which is quite fascinating. It's like new research here from the Netherlands.
That's really interesting. Yeah. I've looked at sort of like research on borderline and all that. I've never seen EMDR as like a treatment for that.
Yeah, yeah. So it's actually a friend of mine that's doing the research. He's the professor of psychiatry here in Rotterdam, and they're looking at, I think they do 5 to 10 sessions of EMDR, and their findings are really interesting. Like I think she said after 10 sessions, 40% of people with borderline personality disorder does not meet the criteria anymore after just 10 sessions.
Wow.
It's incredible. So
For pathology that's like deemed incurable.
exactly, exactly.
I'm curious, 'cause I'm sure you work with wealthy families,
I would with everybody.
with everybody. How would you find working with that population in comparison with the general population?
People tend to think if you're wealthy, you can buy away. You can buy the best therapist. You can buy the best things. And people see that as a pro, and of course it is. I mean, it is beneficial to be able to afford good therapies. I mean, I also work with very poor communities, and then you see completely different struggles. But what I do see is with wealthy families, for example, or even wealthy individuals. I think maybe because there's people get used to buying the best therapist or the best personal trainer or and fixing the problem quickly. They tend to struggle with the idea that you need time to heal from these things. I think we spoke about a lot about how long this takes, but for addiction, for example, there's these research done to look at your reward center, which is the part of your brain that's affected in addiction. And after 1 month of sobriety, your reward center still doesn't react in a normal way to normal stimulus. So if you think of something that's usually enjoyable, like a good plate of food or something like that, nothing happens after a month. So you kind of feel flat in that first phase of recovery, like the raw phase people talk about. Only after 14 months, that reward center is recovered and you will feel motivation in the same way as you did before. You will feel reward in the same way as motivation, reward, all those things. So it takes a year. Even behavioral addictions takes a year. And that year is full of ups and downs. Like in the beginning, you have the detox phase and, people go through physical withdrawals. And then you get the honeymoon phase or the rosy cloud phase. Where people are like feeling better and they look better and they get compliments. And they have life skills and like, high-fiving themselves about how great it is. And then you get to the wall phase, which is typically month 3 to 9, sometimes the first 12 months. And then you think like, why am I doing this? This is hard. I don't want to go to meetings. I don't want to go to therapy. I don't want to do the work. I struggle to get out of bed. I'm tired. That's the wall phase.
Or that's when I went into another addiction, which was the love and sex addiction.
Exactly. Exactly. Spot on. That's where the co-addiction or the other co-addictions comes. The relapses happen in that phase as well. And what I see in wealthy families and wealthy individuals as well is one of the skills that we teach people is to sit with the feelings and sit with the discomfort and let the discomfort exist. And I mean, I think it's logical. If you have money to buy something to fix the feeling, why not? That's the first thought. So if you don't have money, you don't have the opportunity to do that. But I do think that in wealthy families, I see that quite a lot. The struggle of, but can't I get another coach, or can't I go to the treatment center, or can't I, instead of learning how to regulate your own nervous system, do the regulation work. Some days are hard, some days are just unbearable. But to get through those days, I think, wealthy individuals and families struggle with.
Plus, they're moving around a lot, so it's very difficult to continue their treatment because, I mean, I know in the United States, you can't continue with your therapist if you're out of state.
Oh, really? Oh, yeah. Yeah. So in Europe, we don't have that problem, luckily. But people do move around. I mean, at these family meetings, usually with wealthy families as well, we end up working online because everybody's everywhere.
Well, at least they can do that, right? But those,
Yeah,
yeah, I
yeah, you
mean,
can. You can do a lot of things online as well. That's true.
so what are some examples of things that, maybe wealthy families pay for? I mean, I mentioned it in my article a few weeks ago, the ketamine treatments, the Go to the Amazon, do an ayahuasca ceremony. I have a friend who 2 weeks later ended up on the cliffs of Dover wanting to kill himself.
Yeah, goodness, yeah.
The ayahuasca brought back, some child abuse from his childhood that he had repressed, and all of a
Childhood
sudden it
memories
was
and stuff. Yeah, yeah.
yeah. But there was no sort of follow-up. There was no integration of that memory into his body or into his like, the adult part of him couldn't take care of him yet.
Those are perfect examples of what wealthy people might run into. Like these are kind of like experiential or experimental things often. Or things like the ketamine. I also have a lot of examples of wealthy people going for ketamine treatment and paying a lot for it, but they're not getting the best care. Like the most expensive thing is not always the best thing. By going kind of like around the known systems, you also lose the protective factor of these systems. Like things like in the Netherlands, things for ketamine are very, very regulated. And it needs to be in a specific treatment center, and you need to have all the checks in, and the Department of Health comes and checks in on it. And I think if you're wealthy, you can just fly to another country and get it done there, but then you don't get the aftercare and you don't get the right complete recovery package if you want.
How long would it take to integrate? I mean, maybe the ketamine is okay, but it's gotta be coupled with a lot of therapy, right?
Psychotherapy, yeah, and controls, and it has to be regulated how much you get. And like in the Netherlands, you can't get it you can't take the ketamine home with you. So you go to the treatment center, you get it there, you do the psychotherapy according to the protocols that based off on a court just published, not it was a year ago, and it's very, very regulated.
Yeah, I think in this case, I think that the treatment center sent them some psilocybin in the mail, which is a total felony in America.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's also like there was an interesting book. I can't remember the name now exactly. I think it's called Fragile Power by
Oh, yeah,
Paul.
Paul.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Paul
by
wrote.
Paul.
Yeah, you know Paul as well. And he writes about the sense of agency of wealthy people. That there's a different sense of agency to people who are middle income, for example. And that sense of agency also make them struggle to take responsibility for their behavior and their recovery and what needs to happen, and that it's uncomfortable. So I think that sense of agency also plays into it.
This is too uncomfortable.
Yeah, I'm going to get this psilocybin over the mail. Instead of getting really the best person for the job, which might not be the most expensive thing, but it's regulated and the safer option that's also going to have the long-term effects. Like I always teach people like the best short-term solution is not always the best long-term solution.
There's a top neurologist in my karate class in New York City, and I've asked him, I'm like, "Nick, would you ever do psilocybin or something like that?" He's like, "No, I'm too afraid. I'd rather do the work of
Exactly.
intense meditation and just do the work and get to that same spot of
Exactly.
enlightenment, but doing my
Exactly.
own work, not taking a shortcut." I kind of like his philosophy on that. I'm afraid to do psychedelics, even though we fund psychedelic research.
Yeah, no, me too. I'm not taking any of those things. Yeah.
Well, speaking of tools, though, you're developing some tools for families who can't access traditional therapy, right? What's your dream there?
Yeah, so that's kind of exciting. That's my next phase, I guess, after the book. So I've been working with a lot of families, but I mean the method also, it's not accessible to everybody. So the book is one way of making it more accessible. I'm working on something that should launch this year still. That has a lot more digital solutions for this.
Sorry, what kind of solutions?
More digital solutions, more online solutions, more things that fits into daily life, modern life. So things that are educational, but also things that works on your regulation of your nervous system, recovery tools. I think everybody should be in recovery, whether you've had a past with addiction or not, because I think recovery has so much to give in terms of physical health, mental health, community purpose, all those kind of things.
I've seen some therapists argue about the word recovery online. Recovery to you means 12-step, right?
12-step plus. So I always like people say sobriety is recovery. That's not true. Sobriety is a prerequisite for recovery. But the way I see recovery is I think SAMHSA has a nice framework that they talk about health, home, community, and purpose. So for me, it's really health in the broad sense, physical health and mental health. people also tend to just go for therapy and think that's okay. But you also, like do your karate, go to your personal training, go for your runs, eat healthy, those kind of things are also recovery. Have a safe place, have a safe home to recover from. Like that's also part of the family work that we do. Overlap to community, to surround yourself with people that will uplift you and create the environment for you to thrive in. And purpose, like do purposeful things with your life, whether you find it in work or in community or in volunteering, whatever you might find it in, to have a life that's purposeful. And if you build on all those things, it's all those building blocks together. That for me is recovery. And of course, the 12 steps absolutely help with that, with getting there.
Although some people would say recovery starts even before one is abstinent, because you can still go to a meeting and be using as long as you're willing to stop.
Yeah, I always think it's a bit like a Maslow triangle, like it's little building blocks, and hopefully you'll end up in a version of yourself that you can think in the morning, like, you know what, this is okay.
Are you creating an app? Is that it?
Yeah, it's an app and an online environment. The online environment would be educational, but also there will be a community online. There will be a lot of resources, things that you can read, things that you can practice. It should be for everybody, so I want it to be out there, because I think all these things, like remain behind closed doors in therapy rooms or in meeting rooms. And I think it should be available for everybody, actually. So
Fantastic. So if a family listening today took one thing away from our conversation, what would you want that to be?
for families,
Yeah.
be part of the road to recovery. Like you can be part of the whole process, and you can also benefit from all the recovery things that are out there. Like we always think it's the individual that needs to change and needs to improve and benefit from recovery, but families can absolutely benefit from that as well. And every individual can benefit from recovery tools, and that whole process. So be part of the process. Is the most important thing, to stay connected and in the whole process.
I mean, there's a way of being separated from the person of concern, the person suffering, without getting drowning with them.
Absolutely. I mean, you have to work. That's one of the most important things. You have to work on your own boundaries.
I think boundaries is the hardest thing in recovery. I wish there was like a manual, like a boundaries manual, where you would just go, okay, how to deal with that. And then you've got your list of boundaries. I think that would be a great
Okay,
invention.
okay. Maybe if I if I get to do that, then I'll put it on the website, and let you know. I think the hardest thing about boundaries is the fact that you have to repeat them so often. Like people don't just hear them the first time. If you need to set a boundary, it actually per definition means the person receiving the boundary or hearing the boundary will not hear it the first time, because it was a blind spot to them, you know? And people don't just recognize a blind spot and then change the behavior. You have to go back to it and repeat and repeat and repeat until the person knows, oh, this is actually what I need to do.
What would be a perfect an example of a boundary? Like, you will not speak to me so disrespectfully.
Well, not that you will not speak to me like that. I would appreciate if you can use a respectful tone when you talk to me. And then somebody will probably not hear it the first time and still be rude or whatever. And then you can say like, okay, like I said before, this is what I expect of you. And sometimes you have to take a little bit of distance. Like I think, some people are also not ready to accept your boundaries. And then it's good to take a bit of distance. And sometimes it's even good to say goodbye to people who are not respecting your boundaries at all. Boundaries are there for me to preserve and to improve the relationship. That's why they're there. But if the other party does not accept them in the end, then what's the point of the connection? So there's also grades in that. I think you can create a little bit of distance between the person. You can limit the time you spend with the person. You don't have to kind of say goodbye immediately.
What would you say are the biggest differences between, the Netherlands and the US in terms of mental health treatment and recovery?
Oh dear, that's a good question. I can speak best about the Netherlands. I think what's interesting here is there's a great deal of treatment centers that are 12-step based and total abstinence based, and Then there's also the other part is we call it the social psychiatry, or the people with social problems. What is well organized here is, I think, a lot of things, and people from the US are always kind of jealous about it. Almost all these treatments are paid for by the health insurances here. So we can do really, really long intensive treatments, and it's covered by the health insurance. So like my clients, I like to, because that first year is with so many ups and downs with the war phase and the this and that happens, and the family tries to keep up with the pace. And I like to keep people in treatment for a year or two before they're ready to go. And that's all covered.
You keep them in treatment in a treatment center or at home?
At home.
Okay, it's intensive outpatient kind of stuff.
I always think that's better. If you can avoid an admission to a treatment center, that's better. I think treatment centers are great for when you're not able to recover at home. It kind of helps with the part reset. It's great for that. But I think in the end, it's better to do the work at home where the family can participate and everybody can participate together in, and experience things and work on it as it happens. Otherwise, you kind of go through that growth in the clinic and then you get home and then everything's exactly the same.
You know what I was thinking, Constant? Those families that outsource their childcare to nannies and boarding schools, how are these types of families going to deal with the recovery at home? They didn't deal with their children at home. So how the hell are they going to?
I know, and the connection. There's also like the connection between the parent and the child is so different than if you had these nannies. Like I would say, if the nannies are around, make them part of the family meetings.
Oh, good idea. Yeah, because that's another part of the Arise, this model that you're talking about, which is to bring in like even non-family members into the meeting.
Whoever can help, yeah.
And you can bring in therapists, you can bring coaches, you can bring
friends,
your best friend,
colleagues if they're very involved, anybody, yeah.
When I've spoken to people I know about this Arise method, I feel a lot of like, oh no, we're not going to bring people into our family drama. We don't want them to know our dirty secrets.
The family shame, yeah, there it is.
And then I have to say, no, we've got to the more people we get in, the better.
Yeah, because addiction thrives on secrets. That's part of what we have to do, is we have to break that cycle of the secrets and talk about the messy bits and talk about the hard parts and talk about the tough days.
I think this is huge. Addiction thrives in secrets or in the darkness.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I've heard shame doesn't tolerate light.
No, the best thing you can do with shame is to speak it out. If you, as long as you don't speak about the shame, you don't talk about the shame will thrive. Just stay in your head where it is actually. The shame is just inside your head, and then usually when you start to speak about your shame, other people don't see it like that. Usually, it's amazing. It dissolves. We can talk about it. Well, it's been so lovely. I love our conversation. Huh? Yeah, me too. Yeah. I think there's a lot here for our listeners. If this episode landed for you, share it with someone who might need to hear it. And if you haven't already, subscribe so you don't miss what's coming. But here's the real thing I want you to know. If you're carrying something you can't talk about, if you have every resource except someone who actually understands what wealth costs, I work one-on-one with people like you navigating exactly that. You can reach me at Diana, Oehrli.com. Thanks for listening.